Hi, welcome to this episode of Industry News. And today I have Greg Crawford from FT Times. And we've been trying to book this episode for a long time, just back and forth. And finally, we got Greg on the show. And Greg has 3.5 decades of time in the media industry. And I guess he is what we call an OG in the insurance industry when it comes to media side. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here. And yeah, I'm glad we are finally able to make this happen. So looking forward to our conversation today. So yeah, it's kind of scary when I think about how long I've been in the media business. But what's interesting, so I've been with P&C Specialist now for about 2.5 years. So I joined 2.5 years ago. So that would have been in 22, I guess. And it almost brings my career full circle because I started my first editorial job in journalism was at AM Best, which I know a lot of your readers are familiar with. So way back in the late 80s, the very late 80s, I had a friend who worked at AM Best, a woman who I had graduated college with. And at the time I had gotten a publishing job. I wanted to get into publishing in New York because that was where the publishing hub of the world is. But I was on the sales side and I was doing telemarketing sales, which was not what I was looking to do. But I thought, hey, it's a foot in the door. I'll take what I can. So anyway, this friend of mine called me, said there was this job at this company called AM Best in Old Wick, New Jersey. And I'd gone to college in New Jersey. I didn't grow up here, but I was like, where the heck is that? So anyway, long story short, it was a job writing. And I said, well, if I can be writing, then that's my ticket. So I took this job and it was writing for what was called, I don't know if they still have it, believe it or not. It's called Best's Underwriting Guide. And it was a print publication. They had these big fat 3-ring binders. And we'd write about different businesses so that an underwriter, say at any major carrier, okay, I run a bakery and I'm coming to you, Jeff. You're my underwriter, you're my agent. I need to policy. So you can go to the Best Underwriting Guide, read all about the risks, what's the business like, what's the operations and all of that, help you decide, help you underwrite that risk. So I was doing these things. I did them for a few years. I'm trying to remember now some of the more interesting ones. I did one on circuses, believe it or not. So I actually took a trip one day to New York City to watch the Big Apple Circus and talk to some of the people about what are the risks in a circus. And you can imagine with like animals and spectators coming and all sorts of lots of risk there. Another interesting one I did was on chocolate making. So not too far. So it's funny now, and I live not too far from where AM Best is, and about 30 minutes north of us is where M&M Mars is. So I did one best underwriting guide on chocolate making. So the Mars people weren't very helpful. They're pretty closed shop. They didn't want to talk to, even though I wasn't quoting them for like an article or anything. Just wanted to learn about the business. So anyway, so I did that for a while, and I did some newsletter work while I was at AM Best. And then I was able to get back into New York City for another publishing company. And at that point, that allowed me to go back to school and work on my master's degree in publishing. And so my thought was when I realized that I wanted to get into journalism I wanted to have a hand in the conversation. What were the issues that were shaping society, and if I could, be part of that, that would be fun. That would be a good thing to do. And I had learned over my college career that I had some aptitude and some skill in writing, so that was where I was going. So I got a job at a publication called Physicians Financial News, which is obviously, complete different from insurance. And but one thing led to the next, and a couple of years later, I was able to same thing. And my dad used to tell me when I was growing up about like connections. It's all about your network and your connections. And he was a sales guy, and he was always touting sales, like you should be in sales. And I never wanted to be. I wanted to be the guy on the other side of the desk buying. So, but anyway, but it was true, and he was right. So my network. So this job at AM Best, a friend of mine from college was there. She said, "Hey, I think this job would be good for you." So I'm at this publication called Physicians Financial News, and one of the reporters left and ended up going to Reuters. And I don't know, 6 months later, I can't remember now how long ago. She same thing. This is early '90s. No, this was still late '80s. So I don't quite think we had email quite at that point. But she pinged me and says, "Hey, there's this job at Reuters reporting on the stock market. I think you'd be great for it." And I mean, that was something I had never really thought about. I had a roommate at the time who worked for a local newspaper, and this guy, I mean, he was run ragged. I mean, he'd go to work at noon, and I wouldn't see him. Get back at 10, 11 o'clock at night, driving all over New Jersey covering these stories. And I thought, that's not for me. I want to be a magazine writer. Anyway, so I get this note from this woman about this job at Reuters, which, as everybody knows, is a hourly, minute by minute news service. And I thought, well, here's a great opportunity. If I can spend a couple of years there, put it on my resume, that'll be my ticket. So I applied for the job, and this was kind of out of my wheelhouse, really. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I was interested. I was a personal finance reporter at the time, so I could write about stocks that looked good and industries and things like that. But really, Wall Street, I didn't really focus specifically on Wall Street anyway. I had this interview, and I guess I did a good job because they offered me the job. And it was the timing. Timing is everything, as they say, Jeff. Um, like right after they sent the letter out to me offering the job, apparently they put a hiring freeze on. So I mean, it was that close. So I took the job, and when I took the job, it was right when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So that'll give you your timestamp for that part of my life. And at Reuters, there's a training period that you go to the main office, and you spend 2 weeks in what's called the pit. And I don't need to explain what it is, but by the name, you can imagine it's not the funnest thing in the world. But since I was covering Wall Street, I was at the John Street and Lower Manhattan office, and I went down there, and Iraq invades Kuwait, market goes haywire. I end up just working there. I never had to do my time in the pit, so I avoided that. So that was a stroke of good luck for me. I learned all the skills, of course, that one does when you spend that time. Anyway, so that was sort of like trial by fire, because I mean, I just jumped right in and learned on the fly, and I think it was really great training for me, not only just understanding how to write quickly, because I was updating the stock market activity, on an hourly basis. I do a wrap at the end of the day. I did a pre-market open, so it was really good experience for me. We had back then, the Reuters terminal had what they call the wall page, WALL, and it was like 4 lines of text. And then at the top there was like the Dow, the S&P, maybe the Nasdaq, a couple of the big market indexes. And those pages, like as the reporter covering the stock market, you could send that directly to the Reuters wire. So here's a story for you. So um, Iraq has invaded Kuwait. The world's gone haywire, and market's going crazy. And one day, I don't remember the date. This was a long time ago, obviously. I'm writing the wall page, and I said in it that Iraq was now evacuated, or now leaving Kuwait, and I sent it out to the wire. And I mean, that would have been huge news, right? So my boss says, "What? Iraq is leaving Kuwait?" And I looked at the wire, and I meant to write not, N-O-T, but I typo N-O-W. And I'm like, holy cow. Did I actually? I'm like, and I'm so nervous. Like I had a hard time like retyping it because I was freaking out, because I thought, I mean, this could move the market. I mean, this was serious. And I'm like, holy cow. But I changed. I don't know how long. I wasn't on the wire for very long, but boy, I'll never forget that. And that feeling of just panic, like, holy cow, I made a big mistake. I didn't get fired. I ended up spending 10 years at Reuters, and so it turned out to be a great experience. But that is one day I'll never forget. So it was pretty exciting. It was a pretty exciting time to be covering Wall Street, and so I did that for a few years, and then there was an opportunity to go to Hong Kong for Reuters. So I did. I took that opportunity, got that job. My wife and I went to Hong Kong. I worked in the bureau there, covering kind of the same thing, business reporting. Obviously a lot of big companies in Hong Kong. And this was before the handover, so it was still British territory. And I remember when I went, they had a program where, as a reporter, like I could take lessons to learn Chinese. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'll definitely do that. So I go there with great intentions. You get involved, same thing, jumping in, doing reporting, covering markets and companies. And since it was still British territory, even though a lot of the people and the companies I would cover were run by Chinese people, everything was in English, right? So I wasn't forced to learn Chinese, right? So I
Which
didn't
version were you
actually.
learning?
I think Cantonese was like the local language, right? And it's
Right.
Cantonese is a lot more complicated than Mandarin, and I think so. The locals would speak Cantonese, but I think like for press conferences and things like that, it was mostly Mandarin. So, but again, I went in the couple years that I was in Hong Kong. I think I went to one press conference where the presentation was in Mandarin, and then they translated it into English. It usually was they do it in English and then they translate it because there was a mix of sort of English speaking reporters and then Chinese reporters. Um, so I never actually had to learn the language, but we had a Chinese language service. So we had I think there were four people who were native Hong Kong who translated our stories because Reuters had a China news service at the time, and so they would translate it into Mandarin for that service. And so my wife, we became pregnant at the time when we were there, so I thought, and we were taking, the Lamaze classes, the prenatal classes that you take before you have a child. And we were taking them at Matilda Hospital, which is so Hong Kong is basically a big rock, right? So there's like the peak, and this hospital was at the peak, and kind of in Hong Kong Central is where all the taxis would go. So if you need to get a taxi, you know where to go in Hong Kong. And so I asked my Chinese friends to teach me how to say Matilda Hospital, the peak. So when we get in a cab, I could say that we could get to the hospital. So okay, so I go through this whole thing, and so I meet my wife. She was working also at the time. We meet at the taxis where all the taxis are. We get in a cab, and I'm all excited, and I say it, and the guy looks at me like, "What?" I said it like 3 times. Finally, I said, "Matilda Hospital, the Peak." Okay, he took me. So no, there's
What, Greg, I have a question.
yeah.
What percentage of locals speak English in Hong Kong?
Well, at the time, probably 90%.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never been to Hong Kong, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, we left in 96, so it's been a long time, and I know it's changed quite a lot. We went back, I
Yeah.
think, in 2010, and it was still pretty easy to get around. I mean, the signs are all in Chinese and English, and, when you go on the subway, it's in Chinese and English. So they kind of have that dual thing going on, but I don't recall any time where I had a problem because we didn't speak the language. You could always, I mean, maybe a couple of restaurants, where you kind of had to point at the menu. That's what I want, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But English was
Do you,
pretty common.
do you miss the food?
Yeah, there's nothing like it. I remember when we went there, I was thinking, oh, well, this will be good for me because I'll probably lose some weight. I can always lose weight, right? And I thought, oh, that'll be good because I won't be familiar with the food well. That did not happen. It was great. Um, So here's another sort of funny story from my time in Hong Kong, if you'll, um, if you want to hear it. So uh, the companies in Hong Kong, one of the companies I covered was Hang Seng Bank. It's a unit of HSBC, so it's a huge bank, and they would do these media lunches maybe once a year, twice a year. So the first time I went to one of these, it was me and a bunch of local reporters. There might have been another Western person. I don't really remember now, but they were all interested because I was like, the American at the table, right? And so you're sitting around this big long table, and in Hong Kong, you sit at a round table and they have these big lazy Susans, right? And this food, all the platters of food, and it just spins around, and you just kind of take the food as it comes by you. It's really cool, and the food's delicious. So we're talking, we're having this conversation. They're asking me all sorts of things, and because they were very curious. And I said something about, I really love trying new food, which is true. I love trying new food even to this day. And I said, oh, the food here has been great, blah blah blah. And they were so excited. And they said, well, since you're sort of the honored guest, um, the honored guest gets to eat the fish eyes because when in China and I'm sure Chinese restaurants here, you get a steamed fish. It's the whole fish, and you
Yeah.
just kind of pick it apart. And so yeah, so they're like, oh, so as the honored guest, you get to eat the eyeballs. And I'm like, seriously? I'm like, oh man. I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? I can't like not, I'm not gonna like um not do it, right? That would be
What does it
wouldn't be
taste
great.
like?
I just swallowed. I popped it in my mouth and I just swallowed. I'm like, I can't. I couldn't bring myself to actually chew it. But I didn't want to disrespect him, obviously, and not say, "Oh no, no, that's too much for me." So that was another funny story. So, um, but yeah, and then we left Hong Kong before the handover, and I ended up moving to Chicago, which is a place where I never expected to go. And we spent a long time there. Spent some more time at Reuters, still kind of financial journalism, covering companies in the Midwest. Covered McDonald's for a long time, and Sears, the retailer Sears, which even back then was kind of a struggling retailer. So that was fun. Great group of reporters. When I was in Chicago, one of the well, probably the most I'd say high profile person who I ever interviewed in all of my time. I mean, I've interviewed a bunch of CEOs, but they're not necessarily household names. People like Michael Armstrong, he used to be the CEO of AT&T, people like that. But in Chicago, we had a news desk, like a general news desk that had two reporters, and uh, they would kind of cover, if there was a plane crash or something along those lines. But this one guy, Mike Conlon, he would get these, press invites to different things, and this was probably 98, 99, something like that. The Who, the band The Who, was on tour in the US and they were coming to Chicago. And at the time, their bass player, John Entwistle, when they would tour, he was actually an art like a drawing artist. Like so he had a collection of art that he created and they took it with them when they were on tour in different big cities and they'd have gallery shows and this and that. So there was an opportunity to interview John Entwistle of The Who. And I'm like, I mean, I grew up in the 70s and they're like, John, The Who, are you kidding me? And so I let a day go by because he would put this out to the whole newsroom and say, "Hey, does anybody want to do this?" So the next day I came in, I'm thinking, I'm sure somebody snapped that up. I mean, John Entwistle is like that's a big name. I mean, it's not quite Pete Townsend or Roger Daltrey, but still the bass player for the Who. I mean, come on. So I said, "Hey, Mike, did anybody take you up on that?" And he said no. So I was like, well, "I'll do it." So I actually got to interview John Entwistle from the Who, and it was interesting. I went up to the hotel room, and then I goes, they brought me into a room, and I had to wait, and he came in. It wasn't warm and fuzzy, I'll tell you that. I mean, it was a fine conversation. I wrote a story about how, he's this great artist and he takes his art around as they tour. I forget what tour it was. I don't know if they were doing Quadrophenia or what, but it was fine. But it was pretty cool just to like sit in a room with this guy. I mean, all this great music that they produce. So that was kind of fun. Um, I have another interesting reporting story. And here's how sort of reporting goes. You as a reporter, you're talking to your sources, you're finding out what's going on. If you follow industries or companies, you want to talk to people at the companies and things like that. But also, being a reporter, you're just sort of a curious person. And I guess I'm just a curious person. And when I was living in Chicago, in the Chicago area, I was commuting from the suburbs. So I catch a train into the train station in downtown Chicago, and I'd walk probably about 4 blocks to the office at Reuters, and I'd cross over the Chicago River over this bridge, and I noticed for a while there was this guy who was playing the saxophone, and he wasn't just like a hack. Like I could tell this guy knew how to play the saxophone, and it was great. And I'd stop and I'd talk to him um, and this and that, and so finally I said to myself, I should interview this guy, just see what's he all about. So I talked to him one day and he came by the office, excuse me, and his name was Byard Lancaster. And he's actually from Philadelphia and he's a saxophone player and he plays a session musician on a bunch of jazz albums and he comes to Chicago. I think he had family in Chicago or something like that. And he would just go out on the street when he was like working out songs and licks and things like that, just to get how what the people on the street felt like. If he got a good vibe, then he knew that was good to go. So um, so I wrote the story about Bayard Lancaster, and it was really cool to write. I mean, I was covering derivatives at the time, right? I mean, stocks, stock options, futures, things like that. But I was able to write the story about this guy Bayard Lancaster. So I wrote the story. They put it on the wire And then they want, so, at Reuters as a news agency, newspapers, like print newspapers, subscribe. So they get the Reuters feed. So they can pick up those stories and run them in their paper. So I've had bylines in, like, the Jerusalem Post and, places all around the world, because writing a stock market report, that was a very common one. So a lot of places will use a newswire's, the writer's byline. Some will just say Reuters. But anyway, um, for this story, they ran the story on the wire, and then the editors decided they wanted to get a picture of this guy. So I'm like, well, I would just sort of run into him on the street. So I did actually see him, and he's like, well, I'm going to Philadelphia. This is where I'm going to be, whatever. So this is still like the weirdest coincidence in my life, I think. So I tell the people in New York, okay, he's going to be in Philadelphia. This is the day, blah, blah, blah. Here's where he's at. So they send a photographer, take pictures of this guy, Byron Lancaster. Well, and this is no lie, the day that they go to send a photographer, they find him. Who's standing there, like, listening to him? Carlos Santana. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Did you guys get both of them in the picture? Thank you for watching this video. Now a quick message from our sponsor, Mav.
Thanks, Jeff. I want to let you all in on a secret that top producing agencies don't want you to know about. If you're in P&C insurance, you know firsthand how much you're getting squeezed by your call center. It's becoming less predictable and less economically profitable to scale. But here's the thing. The top producing agencies making over $100 million are not running their leads through a human-based call center. They're running them through an AI expert like Mav to qualify, quote, and hand deliver the highest intent qualified leads to your agents. Mav takes care of the back and forth, having unlimited 24/7 conversations with your leads that are personal and relevant so you can scale to the moon. Ready to ditch your call center and 10x your agency? We're giving the listeners of insurtech $15,000 worth of credit to try Mav. Head to hiremav.com/insurtech to claim this offer.
oh yeah, yeah. There's Byard playing, and Carlos is like, and you can tell, he's got the hat and the hair, the beard, classic Carlos Santana. Uh,
What
so they're
release?
able to
What's
send the
this?
story on the wire.
Which news site? Byron Lancaster. I'm curious now, so I'm trying to Google for image.
Oh, it's Byard, Byard,
BYARD.
and he passed away. Because I kind of kept up in touch with. I didn't really keep in touch with him, but I kind of kept tabs on him for a long time. I think he passed away probably 10 years ago now. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you can find that picture. I don't have a clip of it, unfortunately. I did for a while. I don't know.
Yeah, it should go back in your like on your wall
Yeah,
somewhere
it's
in the
right. I know.
background.
It's true. Yeah, yeah. That was pretty cool.
What newspaper publisher was that?
It was Reuters.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you find it, let me know, because I hadn't thought about that story in quite some time, but that was really fun, and I'll never forget that. They were like, "Hey, Carlos, like, why was Carlos Santana?" I mean, maybe he was playing a show in Philly or something like that. But talk about coincidences. So, but that's the
That's
kind
pretty
of
cool.
thing, as I was saying, Jeff. As a reporter, you just pick up things, and you think, hey, that maybe that's a story, and you never know. So some things don't play out, but a lot of things do, and those are the fun stories. You do, like, even now at P&C Specialist, we do the nuts and bolts coverage that we need to do to cover, losses from the wildfires and earnings that are coming out, and underwriting profits and premiums, what companies are doing with premiums. But it's those stories that we get a little under the, you peel the onion away a little bit. We have a story running today on, talking with some homeowners in Florida, and how they're dealing with this issue in Florida, where their rates are going up, and they're being forced off of the insure of last resort citizens. And so we've got some of those stories, and it's a good story. It's a fun story, and those are kind of those sort of human interest stories. A lot of people want the hard news, what's happening. And we at FT Specialist, all of our publications, excuse me, the idea is to help people, like, do their jobs better and get insight into the industry. But it's some of these other stories that really give you a sense of flavor of kind of the people behind the industry and things that are driving it, that really, for me anyway, those are really the fun types of things to do. So but that was a fun event at Reuters. And just like I said, just seeing this guy playing the saxophone every day, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So worked out pretty well. So when I left Reuters, I freelanced, and I actually did some freelance work for Chubb. So this is like in the early 2000s, because my wife had a connection at Chubb, and so I did a couple of press releases and things like that for Chubb. So I kind of had a couple of, over the years, just some intermittent touch points with the insurance industry. And then freelancing was great. It's nice to sort of be your own boss, as people say, and that was something I always wanted to do. But it's tough. It's not as easy as it sounds, because if you're not working, you're not making any money. So I did that for about 3 or 4 years, and I had an opportunity to go back into full-time work, which I decided that it was probably a good time to do that. My kids were younger, and I needed to start saving for college and things like that. So I took a job as a reporter for a publication called Pensions and Investments, which is owned by Crane Communications. And so I worked there. And so that was really institutional asset management. So, I mean, that was very, very specific. It was interesting because I was covering trading. So I still kind of had that Wall Street connection. So way back when I started at Reuters covering Wall Street, and the Goldman Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys of the world, I was still sort of covering that from the trading perspective for institutional investors. So I did that for a long time, and I stayed at Crane for a long time in a couple of different publications. I worked for them, but all in the financial world. Spent a few years at one of their publications called Investment News, which is for advisors, so covering the whole financial advice. But same thing. I was an editor for kind of the personal finance side of it, and so yeah, I did that, and then I worked on some custom publishing, which is a very big part of the media landscape these days. So I did custom publishing for pensions and investments. So I wasn't really in the insurance world for a while. I took a job. So you make your career decisions as you think that are going to work out, and sometimes they do, and sometimes you make your best guess, and they don't necessarily work out. So I was doing this custom publishing thing, and I got pinged from an asset management firm that I had actually known about, because we had gone to do a pitch for get them to do some custom publishing with pensions and investments. And so they were looking for an investment writer, and I thought, well, it's kind of what I'm doing now, but I can do it on the inside. And so I took that job, and it was this was during the pandemic. So I mean, there were probably 6 months of interviews. I mean, it was like one interview, and a week would go by, and I'd hear from the HR person, oh, well, they liked you. Why don't you meet this person? Anyway, long story short, I took the job, and it didn't really it didn't really work out for me. It wasn't really. I don't know. I still, even to this day, I'm not quite sure what I missed in all those interviews. What was there are no really I mean, the people were great. Just the work wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. I was writing, but it was a lot different than being in the news business. So after about a year, I decided I needed to, and I thought, well, if you're going to change, then you need to make sure that you changed and you go to a place that you're going to be able to stay at for a long time. I'm not getting any younger here, so um, anyway, so I started sending my resume out. Obviously know a lot of people in the news business, and there was this job at this company called FT Specialist for this publication called P&C Specialist, and I thought, well, I can be an editor. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the subject matter is. It's a business publication. But I do remember in that interview process, one of the people I had interviewed with, I don't know if it was my boss, or I think it must have been my boss. Said, so, what do you think about personalized insurance? And Jeff, like the the perception of insurance is that it's sort of this boring, old sort of sluggish industry that, is kind of stuck in the past or whatever. So this question comes to me, and I hadn't really thought about it before. So I'm thinking, on the fly, I'm like, well, everybody has auto and home insurance, right? So it's not like it's irrelevant, and so the fact that pretty much everybody has to have some kind of personalized insurance means that there's a lot going on, and companies have to be continuously, thinking about, what's the next step, how do they, change their business model or keep their business model, what's working, what's not working, and that intersection between public and between customers and the business. So I thought, and I mean, I wasn't BSing. I mean, I was thinking, as I'm thinking about this, yeah, I mean, everybody has insurance. And of course, one of the issues, I think, is, Jeff, that a lot of people, their first sort of experience with insurance is not good, right? You have your insurance, fine, it's all fine, but then you get in a car accident. it's not good. Or, something happens to your house, not good. So you have this perception that it's not a good thing. But anyway, so I guess I did a good job because they decided to hire me. and and so that was I guess that was like July of 22. Yeah, it was July of 22. So then, sort of all in on insurance, learning and, kind of harkening back to those early days at AM Best. I remember I took a couple of insurance classes back in the day. And we've seen over these last couple of years with what's happened with insurance rates, certainly on the homeowner side and on auto. I mean, I don't have to tell the audience what's what's happening in auto, but you're seeing stories in Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal and Reuters about like what's happening in the insurance industry. So here's this sort of sleepy old industry that nobody really cares about, but now it's front page news. So that certainly tells me and tells us like it's certainly not an irrelevant industry, and not that I ever thought it was irrelevant, but it's not as kind of like sleepy or boring as a lot of people think. I mean, there is a lot to it, and it's a challenging business. I mean, I'm sort of glad that I'm on the side that I'm on, just reporting about it and telling the stories about what companies are doing than trying to figure it out because it can't be easy. I mean, there's that friction, right, between like having to charge what you need to charge to make a profit and not charging so much that people don't want to buy your insurance. I mean, that still I think is a big question that needs to get worked out. And you're seeing it play out in California. I mean, more than anywhere, right? I mean, nobody, certainly not the regulators, don't want everybody to end up on the insurer of last resort because that's a slow burn. So but it's fun. It's a fun industry to cover and to be part of. And say, like I was saying earlier, Jeff, it's just keeping my ears open for what people are saying, what's happening, and what are those sort of interesting stories that we can tell as a publication that just kind of help sort of highlight the industry and kind of some of the cool things that are happening amidst all the hard stuff, right? I mean, it's striking that balance. So but the other interesting, I mean, it's interesting to me, it might not be interesting to anybody else, but so my wife, I've been married now for what's this, 25, it'll be 34 years this year. And my wife, I met my wife at AM Best way back in the 80s when I took that job from this woman who I went to college with. So we worked there together, and then I left and she ended up leaving a few years later and going to the Insurance Information Institute. So when I was at Reuters working downtown, the Insurance Information Institute office was also in downtown Manhattan, lower Manhattan. And so we would meet up and have lunch together and things like that. So that was kind of how our relationship started. And then she ended up years later when we came back to New Jersey in the early mid 2000s or so. She ended up working for Chubb. So kind of throughout my life, I've had this sort of connection to insurance, not really thinking about it. And so it's kind of interesting for me, like I said, probably not to anybody else, but like here at this point in my life, like I've had all these sort of like touch points of insurance throughout my life, and here I am spending every day thinking about home and auto insurance. So it's fun.
What's it like to hire at an insurance shop? I mean, you guys put up insurance news, and you have writers, editors working for you.
Yeah.
What is it like to hire? What do you look for? Thank you for all your support to our channel. Here is a quick word from our sponsor. Please click on the link below in the comment section to sign up for a demo with Track AI.
What if your insurance sales conversations could work harder for you? Meet Track, your AI-powered conversation intelligence partner. Track automatically captures and analyzes every customer interaction, providing instant call summaries, risk analysis, and AI-driven coaching insights. Say goodbye to manual note-taking and hello to more selling time. Track handles the admin work while you handle the revenue. Fully integrated with your favorite platforms. Plus, get custom AI analysis tailored to your unique business needs. Transform your sales team's performance with Track. Visit track.ai today.
Click the link in the description below to schedule a demo with Track today.
So a couple of things. I look for that curiosity that I mentioned earlier, Jeff, somebody who's genuinely curious about the world around them, and you can kind of get a sense of that from an interview process. Someone who obviously writing skill. It's in the world of journalism, there's effectively two kinds of people. There are people who are like really good reporters, maybe not great writers. And then you've got people who are really great writers and not as good reporters. There are a few people who are really good at both. And when you can find that person, I mean, that's a home run. But if you get one or the other, you can work with it. Like if I have a reporter who's a really good reporter, who's not a great writer, that's fine because I can work on the writing and we can work on that together. If I have a person who's a really good writer, who's maybe not such a great reporter, we can work on that too. Like, okay, here's the questions you want to ask, here's how you want to, blah, blah, that sort of thing. So you can work on those too. And, you do need people who there has to be some level of uh, facility in writing, and somebody who knows what a sentence is and who kind of knows what a lead is. I mean, we're all, if you talk to any journalist and if they tell you that they've never buried a lead, then they're lying. I can tell you that right now. We've all buried leads, but somebody who
When
has.
do you think that happens?
What's that?
Why do you think that happens when you bury leads?
That's a good question. I think that uh, you might have a good idea of what you think the story is, and so you get sort of focused on that, and then you craft your story, and then it turns out that you've got what you think is the lead, and then your sort of backup quotes or whatever, and then further down some more information, and then somebody else looks at it and says, well, actually, this is the lead, and you just sort of like it's not a you don't it doesn't happen on purpose. It's just because you're so focused. It's the sort of forest for the trees type of idea. And I see this a lot, like folks get really focused on the issue at hand. And wait a minute, this is kind of the cool thing right down here, and so you flip it. Um, so I think that's kind of what happens more often than not. So yeah, we look for folks who, we give people writing tests, and make sure they can actually put a sentence together that is going to make some sense. And yeah, and I mean, part of it, and I'm sure it's not different in other industries. Sometimes you just take a flyer on somebody. You think they really impress. Like I hired a woman to fill in for one of my reporters who went on maternity leave, and this was a woman was working for a local newspaper in Telluride, Colorado, and she was, I don't know, a few years out of college, something like that, working for this local newspaper, but she was so impressive, and her self-confidence in her interview, and there's a balance, right? She wasn't like overly self-confident, but she just knew what she wanted to do, and she was going to come to New York and do this job, and I had my boss interviewed her and a couple other people, and and she did a writing test. She did fine on the writing test, and we said okay. And she came on. She jumped right in. She did a great job. I don't think we really missed any stories during the time when our reporter was on maternity leave, and it was great. So sometimes you have to, and this is what's happened to me. Like people gave me a chance when I was early in my career, right? I mean this job at Reuters. I mean they had no business hiring me. I mean I never did anything like that kind of reporting. I worked for a publication that came out every 2 weeks. But something, I don't know if it was the interview, but or whatever, and I'll never forget that interview at Reuters. I mean, there were like three, I think there were three. I mean, I felt like I was like being judged. I mean, here I'm sitting here, and there's three like major editors, like the editor of Reuters US, like, and this guy, his name was Reese Sachs, and he was this big, gruff dude. So it's a little intimidating, but for whatever reason, they took a chance on me, and I think it worked out. I mean, it worked out for me. I think it worked out for them. I didn't get fired.
How many, as a writer, how many articles are you supposed to write? Or are they expecting to write a month?
That's a good question too. We don't have right now at P&C Specialist, we don't have like quotas for the number of stories that folks have to write. I mean, it is a question that I think about and I talk to my boss about. My sense is, and I've never worked at a place where there were quotas like that. If you're a reporter, you have a beat, then you're expected to cover that beat and write the stories that need to be written. If you get to a point where a person is not producing stories for whatever reason, then you have to have that conversation. Okay, I'm going to need 3 stories a week from you. I know there are places. I mean, working at a wire service. I mean, I was writing multiple stories a day. Boom, 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 boom. And then when I moved on to a different desk, the corporate news desk, it might not have been multiple stories a day, but it was probably a story a day, right? And certainly like during earnings period, we covered all the companies in the Midwest. So you're writing a lot of stories. And so for P&C Specialist, we publish 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I probably have, 6, 8 stories in each issue. I do work with freelancers, so I have some freelancers who deliver copy for me. Um, but my reporters probably generate 2 to 3 stories a week, and, you know, I'm actually thinking about like, well, we need to kind of tighten those screws a little bit, to get to get more content out there. I think more than the actual number of stories is sort of the quality, right? Are we delivering stories that people need to see that they're not going to see anywhere else? I mean, P&C Specialist, as you probably know, Jeff, is a paid publication, right? There's a paywall there. You have to subscribe. And if people are paying for it, I don't want them to be able to read the same story, somewhere else, right? So it's really delivering quality content that's going to get people engaged and want to like. I have to read P&C Specialist every day, otherwise I'm going to miss something. That makes
Do you
sense.
guys do you guys track like your most viral story, most engaged stories?
Oh yeah, yeah. I get daily.
What was it in 2024? Which story?
2024. Oh, I should have pulled that up for you beforehand.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't. We ran last year, I think it was, yeah, last year in March, we ran a story. One of my reporters wrote a story. So in late 2023, there was a gentleman who worked for USAA who committed suicide, and in Texas. I think it was at the home office. And so my one of my reporters who covers USAA, uh, we wrote the story when it happened, and we got some pushback because people were like, what are you writing that story for? But it's USAA is a big company, and we cover that company. So, but our reporter kind of took it. She ended up getting in contact with his partner. This took months, and she wrote a story using his story as a to shine a light into the world of mental health in the workplace and how important mental health in the workplace is and what companies are doing to support their employees in that area. And that definitely was, yeah, now that I think of it, because I wasn't sure if we did publish, I think in March of last year, and that just went crazy. In fact, you know, uh, FT Specialists, we have publications that cover institutional asset management, mutual funds, life insurance, health insurance, P&C. I think several of our publications ran that story because it really is a universal story, right? I mean, it's mental health in the workplace, whether you work for an insurance company, a bank, an asset manager, a life insurer, whatever it might
What's his
be.
role? What's his
Pardon? What was his role? I don't
was he in
recall.
claims?
I don't think he was in claims. I think he was more kind of operational, maybe in IT, something like that. He had bounced around. I think he had gotten laid off, but then he had gotten rehired in a different role, and he was trying to get up to speed in his new role. And there was supposed to be some training that sort of fell through, and there's this whole confluence of things that just kind of conspired to, make it hard for him. So yeah.
I look up the random stats, like whenever I'm curious about something.
Uh-huh.
Insurance actuary have the highest success in marriage rates.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So when you said that, I just wonder because most of the people I know who talk about mental health are from claims world.
Yeah. Well, and that would
So
make sense.
yeah, and I just wonder if he was in claims because they have like, if you think about like flight control desk, right? Like they always talk about that's high stress,
Yep.
high suicide. My
Absolutely.
son's friend's father just committed suicide not too long ago. He was Washington Dulles
Oh, really?
flight desk. Yeah, he was air traffic control. And if I think about any insurance job, the most stressful one's probably in the claim side,
Yeah.
especially these
Yeah.
days.
Right. Right. Yeah. We're actually working on a story about adjusters, claims adjusters. It's part of that equation right now, kind of looking at kind of the industry through their eyes. And some of these adjusters, that's a hard job too. But working in claims, super stress, right? That's yeah. I'm pretty sure this guy was not in claims. If I recall correctly, he was on the operational side somewhere. So yeah, but
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my story, Jeff. You got the
Well,
whole.
I appreciate you coming on, and you know that I talk to some of your writers sometimes. I post on their posts. You know, I'm engaging with their LinkedIn. So
Yeah,
2025 will not be a boring year for
no,
insurance at all. And I am really looking forward to the stuff that you write. You know, from Verada and a couple of your other writers. You know, I
yep,
pay attention to everything they write. So, you know, I think you guys are doing a fantastic job over there. And I'm glad that I finally got you on the podcast. And, you know,
yeah.
the world get to know the guy behind the scene who's writing all the insurance stories and telling
There
all
you
the
go.
insurance stories.
That's right.
So,
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, and our that kind of feedback and sharing is super helpful. I mean, getting word out, some of the stories that we're doing and having folks like you, Jeff, to be able to, for my folks to sort of bounce things off of. I mean, your knowledge and experience is super helpful because I know enough to be dangerous is what I say, and so if I have an idea, I need folks who I can say, hey, does this make sense to you? Because sometimes things may make sense to me, but maybe they don't. And, one of my reporters, I hear him all the time, like, oh, that's interesting. He talks to himself, well, that's interesting. Oh, and I think, okay, that might be interesting to you, but is it interesting to anybody else is the question. So, having folks like you in our world is extremely helpful. So I appreciate all your interactions and yeah, your persistence too. When you pinged me on LinkedIn the other day, I was like, that's right, I completely spaced. So, persistence pays off.
Greg, 1 year from now, I'm looking forward to have you on again. And next time, we'll talk about some of the most interesting stories in 2025. How about that?
Perfect. I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
All
We'll
right.
talk before then though.
Well, thank you for coming on the show and looking forward to next time.
Same, Jeff. Thank you. Have a great day.